Welcome back. We're getting right to some talking points in our next panel. Let's begin with the details in that new homeless plan. CBS New York's urban affairs expert Mark Peters and political strategist O'Brien Murray are here to dive in. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you for having me here.
Is the new plan doable? Mark, you were the DOI commissioner. You've looked at a lot of these things. Is the new homeless plan to get the people off the streets in 5 years doable?
Is it doable in 5 years? Well, the first problem with it is that it's a 5-year plan, which means essentially what we're doing is dumping this problem onto the next administration.
So really what you're saying is that the mayor is going to be gone in 2 years and somebody else is going to have to follow through.
That's exactly right.
I tweeted that as soon as the story came out. It's a 5-year plan. He won't even be here at that point. This mayor's giving New Yorkers an incentive to move out of town. Now, when he first came into office, he announced his plan for homelessness and shelters and building new residence for people. When he did that, I'm a graduate of NYU, the real estate school. He raised the price on all the lands and potential places because he gave the plan. Everybody said, let's raise the rates. And if you look at the prices on day 1 versus day 2 of administration, and now he's incentivizing people to leave New York, spending taxpayers' dollars in New Jersey and in Westchester. At least that's New York State. But I was appalled at this interview before.
Mark?
Not the interview, by the way, just the response.
Well, I wasn't appalled at the interview, and I think Steve Banks has done a lot of really good work in his 6 years in the de Blasio administration. I'm sort of surprised by the city's lawsuit, the counter-lawsuit in Soda, because essentially what they're trying to do is strike down a Newark ordinance that was designed to protect particularly vulnerable populations. And the lawsuit from the mayor reads more like a lawsuit you'd expect from a landlord's lobby than from a mayor who claims to be sort of a progressive.
OB's criticism?
Well, I mean, look, the mayor has clearly failed to deal with the homeless crisis. We've had, I mean, you know, one of the concerns I have.
So you agree with him?
I agree with him that the mayor has failed to deal with the homeless crisis. I don't know that I agree with all of the characterizations he's made.
I'd be shocked if he agreed with everything.
And what did you say to him?
I say thank you. I think what you did historically was fantastic, and I think the city needs more of that. They need more of that independent thought. It was fantastic what you did. We got to go forward with that. We can't sit here and have taxpayer dollars spent, and I said this earlier in the past, on like-minded people working for this mayor. He has to have constructive criticism. He has to have other ideas, and he doesn't have it. And we saw that here today.
Should we not be sending people across the river or upstate or to, you know, North Carolina to find homeless shelter?
Absolutely not. You realize that the progressives and socialists of the Democratic Party who got this mayor elected, that's what they are today. Went back when he first got elected, they weren't called that. You didn't have the squad and so forth. These are the same people that make real estate the enemy of New York City. Without real estate, we wouldn't thrive. We wouldn't have the companies here. We wouldn't have the jobs here. And they're making it the enemy, and they're saying, we're not even going to play here. We're taking our money off the table and going outside the state. It's ridiculous.
Mark?
Well, I don't entirely agree. I think that there are instances when it may make a lot of sense to decide that we're going to take advantage of less expensive housing in places like Newark. But the program as it exists now doesn't have, as you pointed out, any of the kind of safeguards that are necessary to do that safely, most notably because it doesn't pay. So do you believe when he said, I don't mean to interrupt you, but do you believe when he said that we're not going to have those problems anymore because we now have safeguards in place? I mean, you read the DOI report. You know that the DOI report said that there were city employees who were falsifying documents. Right, and that's, as far as I'm concerned, that was probably the most troubling thing in the DOI report, and I read it very closely.
And he claims it doesn't say that.
Steve, and I think the world of Steve, but he's just incorrect on that point. The DOI report, and I do know how to read a DOI report, having written a lot of them, the report very clearly states that workers filled out forms saying they'd done an inspection when in fact they hadn't.
Steve should be hooked up to lie detectors like they did in Johnny Carson, right, where they say everything about a politician. He was a politician today. He was not doing his job, I believe, for the homeless. He was doing the job for the mayor.
Well,
so let's switch topics, because I know this is something that both of you are concerned about. The Department of Investigation is now examining how much taxpayer money was used for Mayor de Blasio's security detail during the presidential campaign. Do you think that his campaign should be paying back city taxpayers for all of those expenses? Not only the men themselves and their overtime, but their housing, their meals, everything. Should that be a taxpayer expense?
I think it should be a taxpayer expense, just like when the President of the United States gets on Air Force One to go to a campaign rally. There are rules on the fact that some of that has to be repaid.
Partisan, should the taxpayers pay for a purely partisan?
No, that's why I think that, in fact, if the mayor of the city of New York travels outside of New York City, the cost of that, including the cost of the security detail, ought to be reimbursed by the campaign in the same way that the President of the United States, when he engages in purely partisan activity, has to do reimbursement.
The difference between Mayor de Blasio's run for president and every other one you're talking about is those were viable, his wasn't. If his campaign was viable, it would have the money to pay for it. That was the reason they not want to pay it back at this point. That's the reason why this mayor has already been investigated, fined, ongoing things. In the city campaign finance board chart, he was fined $45,000 when he ran for office the first time. The state has gone after him, J-Cope. The feds have gone after him repeatedly in those investigations and now on the federal level for the presidential race. He's got a trifecta. We're not even at Belmont. This is ridiculous what he's doing. And I would go a step further. There's an investigation going on right now for campaign finance. I filed the first one that got him fined $45,000. This mayor is actually using campaign dollars for personal use. Anybody else that ran for president, had no money on the table to start with, would have borrowed money from his multi-million-dollar real estate that he personally owns in Brooklyn, leveraged that, lent it to the campaign legally, and then paid himself back. This mayor chose to break the law, and it's being it should be investigated. That's one investigation that hasn't started yet.
But here's the question. When you talk to the NYPD, they say that it's always been the practice to pay for security. It's not the law to pay for security. So following that along, now we have mayoral races coming up where several of the people who are going to run for mayor and other offices, you know, like borough presidents, who have police details or have DCAS drivers, which are paid for by the city. So should they now be allowed to use these drivers, either the NYPD or civilian drivers, to run in their political campaigns, to take them to purely political events?
So I think the answer is, as a technical legal matter, they probably can, but as a matter of good government, they shouldn't. And I would think that candidates for mayor who have security details ought to consider some system of reimbursing the city for the costs of the security details while they're at purely partisan events.
Now, you're a fantastic investigator. How's this one? Ready for this one? The public advocate that fights for the taxpayers in New York last year, Tish James, ran for Attorney General in New York. What detail traveled with her across the state? I ran the Keith Wolford campaign against her. When I go to an event, it was me going to debates and so forth, and half dozen people, police officers doing their job, but not. I believe certain reimbursements should occur, and those are those types of things. When you're leaving your jurisdiction, it's a responsibility of the campaign, not the city anymore.
So should there be a law about that?
If they don't abide by what the current law is, and the law is not good enough, certainly there should be a law about that. This is the first mayor to run for president as the city mayor. Rudy did it after. Mayor Bloomberg's doing it after. At this point, it has to be fixed. If they're not breaking the law yet, the law's got to be changed.
Well, gentlemen, I both want to thank you both very much for being here today. Coming up, we'll hear your thoughts on the new plan to end street homelessness. Stay with us.